We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Vav and Beis and Meseches Shabbos. This is Shabbos Daf 26b. The Gemara just brought the opinion of Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Rav Shimon ben Elazar says that if you have a fabric, essentially the beginning of clothing, some fabric that's only 3 by 3 etzbos, if it's made out of any material that comes from wood, Rashi gave examples like cotton or canvas, any of that kind of material, it does not become tameh. And since it does not become tameh, it can be used for schach. The exception that he gave was pishton. The exception that he gave was linen, flax item. Those are exceptions. Those do become tameh. So now Abaye is explaining Rav Shimon ben Elazar. We're going to have the opinion of Abaye right now, and then we're going to have an opposing view of Rava. So Abaye says, Rav Shimon ben Elazar v'Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael amru davar echad. Rav Shimon ben Elazar and the Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael are actually saying the same thing. Rav Shimon ben Elazar hadi amron, Rav Shimon ben Elazar that we just mentioned. Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael mahi. What does the Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael say? The Tani devei Rabbi Yishmael, the yeshiva Rabbi Yishmael, they taught hoel v'nemru begadim b'Torah stam. Since it says the word begadim, clothing in the Torah, without specifying what kind of clothing we're talking about. But in one instance, the Torah does specify tzemer upishtim, that we're talking specifically about things that are made out of wool or things that are made out of linen. Ma lahal and tzemer upishtim, just like in that one instance, it's specifically clothing made out of wool and linen. Av called tzemer upishtim. So too, it's the halacha of tumah only applies to things that come from wool and linen. It will be very helpful here to see Rashi. Rashi will explain this. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, v'Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael amar davar echad, t'mehecha teisi l'Rabbi Shimon l'mu'utei shar begadim mituma. Abaye is saying, where did Rabbi Shimon get this idea that all kinds of clothing or other kinds of clothing are excluded from becoming tameh? Ilav de islay had the Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael. It must be that he holds like the Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael. So essentially, Abaye is making the argument that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is learning his halacha from the same source that Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael brings. And according to this approach, when Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says things that come from trees or things that come from wood, those kind of clothing are not tameh, it's really lav dafka. It's not only things that come from wood. Nakat, he didn't choose that specifically. Rav Shimon ben Elazar would have said the same thing if you would have had some clothing made out of the hair of goats. He would have said the same thing out of any item that's not wool or flax. That's not wool or linen. Since he happened to be talking about Yotzim and Eitz, because he was talking about Sukkah over there, so he said that for Tumah. In other words, the only reason he uses the phrase Yotzim and Eitz is because he's talking about Schach. But in reality, he could have said anything that's not Semeru Pishtim. However, Namru begadim b'Torah stam. Now we move to Rabbi Yishmael's source. So what the Gemara said, or what Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael said, was that the Torah only mentions begadim without explaining what material it comes from. Kegon betumas shrotzim betumas meis. For example, Rashi says when the Torah talks about tumah from shrotzim and the Torah talks about tumah from dead bodies, techsib betumas shrotzim o beged or uvemeis v'chol beged v'chol klior v'chein v'shechvas zera v'chol beged v'chol or asher of shechvas zera uvetzis al kan bigdayim. All these cases, it always just uses the word beged. It doesn't specify the material. And the Torah says a specific kind of material in one situation. Which situation? Betumas negoyim. When it comes to the tumah of tsaras, kol al tchila v'achar prat. First there's a klal, a general rule, then there's a prat. V'habeged ki yebo neged tsaras. It says any beged with tsaras. Klal, that's a general. The beged semer, and then it says wool or linen. Prat, that's specific. Av kol begadim hastumim. So now we make a limud that all begadim which are mentioned, even if they're not specified, yalfinim b'mem atzinu du binyanav de'enu elat semeru pishtim. So we learn it out from a mamatzinu, just like over here it's semeru pishtim, so it's over there it's semeru pishtim. So the point of Abaye is that both Rav Shimon ben Elazar and Rabbi Yishmael say the same thing. The only items that can be makabel tumah, any of these kinds of tumas that we've just listed, at the size of 3 by 3 etzbos, are tzemeru pishtim. And again, Rav Shimon ben Elazar, when he said anything that's yotzei min ha'etz except for pishton, that's just because he happened to be talking about schach. But what he really meant was the only items that can become tameh are tzemer and pishtim. Only wool and linen. That is what Rav Shimon ben Elazar meant. That's what the Tana devei Rabbi Yishmael was saying. Now Rava brings an opposing view. Rava Amar Rava says shlosha al shlosha b'shar begadim ika benayu. There is a difference between them. The difference is if you have a garment that is 3 by 3 tfachim, also very small, but it's larger than 3 by 3 etzbos. So if you have such a garment, they would argue about that. To Rav Shimon ben Elazar islay latana Devei Rabbi Yishmael Leslie. Rav Shimon ben Elazar will hold that does become tamei. The Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael says it will not become tamei. So in other words, Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael says the only tumah that applies, no matter the size, is going to be by tzemer and pishtim, by wool and linen. Rav Shimon ben Elazar says no. At a small level, when it's 3 by 3 etzbos, only tzemer upishtim. But when it comes to a larger garment or a larger fabric of 3 by 3 tvachim, in such a situation, even other items can become tamei according to Rav's approach. And Rashi here explains Shlosha Tvachim and Rav Shimon Islay Devehed Yatana Ein Bo Misham Shalosh Al Shalosh. Rava gets this from the phrasing that he uses, where he says there's no din of 3 by 3 etzbos. Aval Shlosha Al Shlosha. When it comes to 3 by 3 Tvachim, the Chazi Afla Ashirim Metame. That can be used even by wealthy people. Now we see some of the logic behind this. That becomes tamei. In other words, the idea is 3 by 3 etzbos is such a tiny amount of fabric. Only the poor would use that, would make use of it. Everyone else would throw it away. But 3 by 3 tvachim is already important enough that even a wealthy person would use it. So there, Rabbi Shimon admits that it would become tamei. Well, the kamon yolef menale buhutama. Klal, and later on the Gemara will learn out where does he get this from. Hoel uminigam yolef. If everything's being learned out from the parsha of Tzaras, and that says semru pishtim. The ilo yolef minigam hechi teisi lechalik ben pishton l'sharmin. If you're not learning from the Gaim, why would you make a distinction between linen and other things? In other words, the source clearly of all of this is coming from the parsha of Negoim and the parsha of Tzaras. That's why there is a distinction between pishton and other kinds of things that are yotzim min ha'etz. That's why there's a distinction possibly between semer and other items. That's where these distinctions are coming from. But if everything's learned from there, why would you suddenly say by 3 by 3 tvachim that it does become tamei by other materials? That the Gemara will address. In any case, to summarize what we have over here, there is a machlokus between Abaye and Rava in terms of what Rav Shimon, essentially the machlokus is what does Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar say. According to Abaye, Rav Shimon ben Elazar says only tzemer pishtim can become tamei at 3 by 3 etzbos, and that's it. And according to Rava, Rav Shimon ben Elazar says tzemer and pishtim can become tamei at 3 by 3 etzbos. Other materials can become tamei at 3 by 3 tvachim. So now the Gemara wants to understand the limudim. Where do we get this from? So the Gemara says, "Tekuli alma miyas shalosh al shalosh b'tzemer upishtim mitamei b'negoim minolan." So one thing we can start off with: everybody agrees that if you have tzemer upishtim, wool and linen, and it's 3 by 3 etzbos, everybody agrees that it gets tumas negoim. The tumah of tzaras does apply. Where do we get that from? That's a principle all agree on. The Tanya we learned in a brisa. Beged, it says in the Torah that a garment becomes tamei. Ainli ala beged, I only know about garments. Shalosh al shalosh minayin. How do I know even a small amount of fabric that's only 3 by 3 etzbos? Talmud lomer, the pasuk says veha beged. So there's the source. Veha beged says it doesn't have to be an actual garment, a full garment. Even if it is a small garment of 3 by 3 etzbos, it can become tamei. The Gemara now questions this. Ve'emol rabas shlosha al shlosha. How do you know that we should include such a small garment of 3 by 3 etzbos? Maybe we should only include a garment of 3 by 3 tvachim, a little bit bigger, a little more chashiv. Gemara says, no, lav kal v'chomeru. That, a 3 by 3 tvachim is obvious from a kal v'chomer. You don't even need a pasuk. Hashta shesiv v'erev metame, because we know the halacha is that even if you have a garment that's not finished yet, you just have the shasi or the erev, which is the warp and the woof that are different directions when you're weaving. Even that is tamei, and we know that that is tamei. So once we know that that's tamei, shlosha al shlosha miboy, it should be obvious that 3 by 3 tvachim is tamei. That comes from a kal v'chomer from shasiva erev. So therefore, we need the pasuk of the habeged must be including 3 by 3 etzbos. The Gemara says, "Yihachi if so shalosh al shalosh nami leisi b'kal v'chomer." Why don't we say 3 by 3 etzbos comes from the same kal v'chomer from shasiva erev? Why are you only making a kal v'chomer from why are you only making a kal v'chomer and saying 3 by 3 tvachim? By the way, shasiva erev is mentioned directly in the pasuk. That's how certainly shasiva and erev are going to become tamei. So how do you know to make the kal v'chomer again to 3 by 3 tvachim? Maybe make the kal v'chomer even for 3 by 3 etzbos. The Gemara explains, "Ela shlosha al shlosha dechazu bein la'ashirim bein la'niyim asi b'kal v'chomer." If you have 3 by 3 tvachim, that can be used for wealthy people and that can be used by poor people. So that indeed is learned from a kal v'chomer. Shalosh al shalosh, but when it comes to 3 by 3 etzbos, la'anim hu dechazin, it can only be used by poor people. La'ashirim lo chazin, it's not fit for wealthy people at all. Lo'ok asi b'kal v'chomer, so it is not going to be learned from a kal v'chomer from shasi ve'erev, and therefore, time at the kasvei kra, halo kasvei kra, lo garminon b'kal v'chomer. Therefore, you need a pasuk of a veha beged for that, for those items of 3 by 3 etzbos, because it will not be learned through a kal v'chomer. So that's it. So the limud for 3 by 3 etzbos by tzemer and pishtim is from vehabeged, and 3 by 3 tfachim, that's learned from a Kal V'chomer from Shesiva Erev. The Gemara now says, 1 second, maybe this word v'habeged should include something else. Ve'emel rabba shlosha al shlosha b'shar begadim. Maybe this extra word v'habeged can include 3 by 3 tfachim by other items that are not wool and linen. How do you know that this extra word includes a tiny amount, a 3 by 3 etzbos, of wool and linen? Maybe it includes the same amount, 3 by 3 tvachim, of other materials. So to that, the Gemara says, Amar Kra, no, the pasuk says, Beged tzemer upishtim, Beged tzemer upishtim, in midi achrinalo. Since the pasuk specifies wool and linen, we know to keep our limudim only within the framework of tzemer and pishtim. So the Gemara says, Ve'ema ki imot mishalosh al shalosh. 1 second. The Gemara is still not finished. Maybe when it comes to, maybe we're only excluding other garments from 3 by 3 etzbos. Aval shlosha al shlosha mitami. How do you know the pasuk of tzemer and pishtim totally excludes other garments? Maybe the way we should understand is as follows: when it comes to tzemer or pishtim, that can be tameh even 3 by 3 etzbos, and that can be learned from the Kal V'chomer from Shesi and Erev. And then maybe the extra pasuk of v'habeged tells us that by other garments it's 3 by 3 tvachim. So the Gemara is still not satisfied that tzemer and pishtim totally excludes other garments. So the Gemara says trei miyut iksiva. There's actually 2 exclusions of other garments, because the pasuk says beged tzemer o beged pishtim. It says beged tzemer or beged pishtim. Chad l'mute mishalosh al shalosh. One pasuk excludes shalosh al shalosh. V'chad l'mute mishlosha al shlosha. And the other one excludes other garments, even if they're 3 by 3 tvachim. Rashi explains trei miyut iksivi. There are 2 exclusions. Trei zimne iksivi beged tzemer o pishtim. It actually says the word tzemer pishtim twice. Zos toras nega hatzaras beged hatzemer o hapishtim. It also says zos toras nega hatzaras beged hatzemer o hapishtim. So you have these 2 psukim, beged tzemer o pishtim and beged tzemer o beged pishtim. So that totally excludes other garments. Now the Gemara says that all works very nicely according to Abaye. Just remember what we said before. According to Abaye, other garments are completely excluded according to all opinions. That's how Abaye put together Rav Shimon ben Elazar and the Tana Devei Shmuel. But what about according to Rava? Ula Rava da'amar shlosha al shlosha b'shar begadim ika benayu. Rav Shimon ben Elazar islay, the Tana Devei Shmuel leslay. Now according to Rava, who says there's actually an argument by 3 by 3 tvachim by other materials, and according to Rav Shimon ben Elazar they are tameh, and according to the Tana Devei Shmuel they are not. Shlosha al shlosha b'shar begadim. So when it comes to 3 by 3 tvachim by other begadim, and the Gemara of course will ask, going on to the next daf, where is the source for Rava within Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar? And we'll continue and see that limud in the next video on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph.